Is this a big graphic design thing, this Dublin?
Yeah,
Is that what it is
it's
fundamentally?
about 2,500 people.
Does it differ from many of the others?
It's funner.
Is it? Why? You've been?
I've been twice. They get good people. The audience is very proactive. The Irish are jolly.
Yeah, you're not telling me anything. I don't enjoy being in the company of others anymore.
Why?
I don't know. I've done it too often.
The company of others in general, or the company
In
of
general.
others who speak this design language?
Well, design language has disappeared in our time, in our location. I mean, the rubbish that goes for design conversation is appalling.
Say more about that. Rubbish meaning
The lack of observation, the lack of analysis, the institutionalized commonality of everybody's belief, the disregard for the real intention, purpose, and function of design in the culture. I mean, it's absurd. I mean, it's largely a promotional tool. I mean, all these events and conversations that occurred that are visible to us, primarily to exploit the personalities of practitioners so they can appear on stage, make a statement, and through the vehicle of promotion, get more work. So much of it is intended, the two most corrosive things in the culture, any culture, right? Fame and money. And they're intended fundamentally to, I know I'm being extremely general now, but to pursue those objectives.
But compared to what it was like when you started out,
right?
Where is the difference? I mean, there were promotion. The field wasn't as large, but people needed to promote themselves.
Yeah.
There weren't as many conferences, to be sure, but people. Designers would do what they could to be known. Design, particularly graphic design, wasn't really known in the society and the culture the way it is today. I mean, it has taken on.
That's quite true. None of us knew what graphic design was. And perhaps cultures are best when they're most innocent. But you had an emerging activity, an emerging profession that wasn't very well defined, except by extraordinary practitioners. There were a handful of them, people like Leone and Rand and so on. I'm not talking that far back, actually. It was just a generation that preceded my own experience. So, but the thing that was consequential about it was I actually think it was primarily not advertising. I think the most corrosive thing about the relationship between design and the public has been the idea that design is a manifestation of promotion and advertising and persuasion. And persuasion turns out to be the worst thing that you could do as a designer in many ways.
But that goes counter to what you've been doing over the last 10, 15, I even say 50 years.
Don't expect consistency from me.
But that is consistent. You've consistently had a message or messages that you've wanted to get across through graphic design or through other forms of design, because you're not just a graphic designer. How is that different? I mean, your messages may be more valuable than a message for Campbell's soup. But what is the
I like
difference?
Campbell soup, at least the tomato soup. I think you have to sort of start from the beginning, which has to do with the role of art and communication in general, distinction between what is art and what is not art, and why people go into making things and who they hope to influence. And also to understand the distinction between attentiveness and being persuaded to do something. I think one function that we have collectively is to make people aware of what is real. In fact, perhaps that's the highest function of anyone involved in the arts, to arouse people's interest sufficiently so they see what is real, or in fact, they see what is in front of them. Because as you know, it's extremely difficult to see what's in front of you. But that certainly isn't the role that most design has assumed now, because like everything else, it is whatever the intention of design originally and its origins, everything has been swept aside by the idea of fame and money. And everything is measured by its success in a financial way. I mean, it's so pervasive that when you hear Congress speaking about not affording something, they never speak in terms of what is a good civilization or what is a good culture. They speak about how much money there is in the bank and how much money we can save and put into the pockets of our friends. I mean, the shift of consciousness from making people aware of an existing condition and make them move in a particular direction, not necessarily to their own good. I mean, I think the thing that's most frightening for people involved in the graphic arts or in the communication business or in advertising or in promotion is the sense that you are persuading people to move against their own interests.
Right.
I mean, once you have the sense that your role in society is to make people do things that they don't necessarily want or need, and in many cases is harmful to them, then you have a kind of internal adjustment to make about who you are, what you want in life, and what it means to be human, and what is community, and who you're related to, and what is art anyhow. I mean, all those questions arise if, in fact, what you feel you're doing is antithetical to the needs of the people you're addressing. And I have to say that advertising and money have very effectively swept aside the other considerations about what it means to be a good citizen, and what it means to be a good practitioner, and what it means to be helpful to your friends, and so on.
Let me ask you this, you were talking about Leo Leone, you were talking about Paul Rand as preceding your generation. Paul Rand was in advertising. That's where he planted his flag.
Yeah.
The greatest goal that he had as an advertising man was to make things clever, make things jump out of the noise that was around him, make it more intelligent. And that was a good enough goal. Where does that fit into what you're saying?
Well, I don't know what Paul's goals were, and I don't know if Paul knew what his goals were. In some ways, he was as innocent about this relationship to the public as most of us are. I know that he was, above all, a man obsessed by some knowledge and experience with beauty, whatever that word means, but it is a fundamental part of our experience and a very important part of it. And Paul's idea was that beauty could be an effective way to reach people or make them pay attention to something, especially when Paul started, there was so little of it around in, I suppose, technical terms. The stuff looked, so much printed material was so
unthought out.
unthought out, incoherent. I mean, and self-canceling. I mean, he was unique in this, and perhaps the most significant figure in the process of bringing the idea of modernism, which had to do with a certain clarity of form and basically a way of dealing with the way things looked, to human consciousness. And people will say, wait, that doesn't look like everything else. And alerting you to the fact that you were in a different realm of experience. Well, that was very odd at that time. And it caught on like after, couldn't say wildfire because it's been a long fire, but it was incredibly persuasive and breathtaking. It was exhilarating to think that you could make things that look good and that people would respond to them. The question of what his relationship was to advertising is an interesting one. And I'd be interested to get his view on how he thought about that subject or thought about the whole question of persuasion.
Well, also similarly, when you started out, I mean, you had come back from Italy where you were exploring art with Morandi. You started in a studio, Pushpin Studios. It was a commercial art studio.
Yeah, incidentally, what's very mischievous is the idea of commerce and the reconciliation of art and commerce. They're not easily reconciled, but there is an adjustment that has to be made in order to operate in life. I was just writing a little essay, and I was saying, even Leonardo, when he did The Last Supper, had a client.
Right.
Not only a client, but he also had an audience he wanted to persuade of something, right? And if it was good enough for Leonardo, it probably should be good enough for us. Well, at least Leonardo felt that what he was persuading people to do was in their interests. That the idea of allegiance to God or astonishment at the Last Supper and so on had something to do with human need and human development. It was not selling them a pack of cigarettes.
Well, you've never done cigarettes and you've stayed away from advertising, but what was in your mind when you started out, when you realized that there was another way to go? It wasn't the modernist way. You were headed in another direction.
Well, that was a different thing. The style was a different thing. Although modernism did provide one thing, it provided the idea of paying attention to the way things look more than what they said. If you look at modernism, you'll see that the narrative part of modernism is rather skimpy, but that the formal part, the arrangements of the pieces, the surfaces, the colors, all the things that we see and that we perceive through that lobe of our brain that is non-rational, you can see that the modernist attention was on that part of it, and much less on narrative storytelling and persuasion. And that's almost why the field itself sort of separates between advertising and design. But no one has a very clear idea in this field of what is the distinction between them, particularly now that advertising and design and marketing are all lumped into this mess of, a thick, noxious stew.
Called branding.
And if you read any of the articles in the magazines of the applied arts and so on, you'll think that's all there is branding, changing somebody's identity from a circle to a square, or moving 3 letters in a different arrangement. and getting paid $150,000 for using it that way. I mean, this idea that branding is the highest form of design is reprehensible. Not only that, it's simple-minded. The idea that the profession itself is primarily concerned with convincing people that in the mark or in the brand, there is something worth paying attention to that elevates it in the realm of human observation. What nonsensical crap. Branding is a little simplistic, a feat that can be accomplished by anyone. Why it assumed its role as a replacement for more complex and interesting activities in the design world is beyond me, except for the money.
You are an artist. There are things that you do that come from you that it doesn't matter who the client is. You're using that client almost as a patron to get to the place you want to be, formally, conceptually. Is that part of your strategy? Or is that something that just happens? Or did you earn it because you've been doing it for so long?
It's hard to determine. I mean, being an artist or producing art is a judgment of history, right? You don't know. We know that there were things considered art that are now considered rubbish, and vice versa. So it's a historical event. It's sort of, the work has to function for a long time before you can say, okay, you're in. You know, you did something that proves your art. You made people feel better. You enlarge their collective consciousness. You're in, you're okay. Intention doesn't do that. You can't want it to happen. It has to happen by virtue of some particular gift. And that's the great mystery of art, is the fact that it is involuntary, that artists are not self-selecting, they're chosen, that you can want all you want to be an artist and still end up not an artist, but it doesn't.
And call yourself an artist.
And call yourself an artist. The thing about being an artist is so wonderful is that it's self-anointing. All you have to do to be an artist is say, I'm an artist, you're in. I mean, who's going to deny that from you? It's one of the few areas of life where you can own something without ever being challenged.
But you can think in terms of yourself. I mean, you raise your hand, I'm an artist. That's the surface. You know, what do you do for a living? I'm an artist. But when you're creating, you've done many prints, beautiful prints, just quiet prints. When you're doing that, what are you thinking of? Do you think of yourself, or do you think of the form on the page? Do you think of who this is going to appeal to? Do you have any vision other than what's in front of you?
One of the characteristics, I think, people in the arts who are driven by it is their need and commitment to making things. Is that you don't like to spend a day without having made something, without physically having transformed something from what it was to what it is. It doesn't mean you'll be an artist, but that is one of the characteristics. And the desire to make things is a profound and lifetime commitment. You find that it's the most important thing in your life, that there's nothing that makes you feel more alive, more human.
So when you wake up in the morning on a good day, do you know what you're going to do? Or is it just that feeling, that rush that you want to get into the office and do what you can?
No, I don't necessarily. Well, some days I know what I'm going to do, and some days I just want to get to the office to see what there is to do. And some days I get here and I make up something to do. I mean, but above all, if I didn't have a place to go to and work, it would be hard for me to conceive that I'm still alive. I mean, the one thing that making things gives you is it gives you a sense of being alive, and it provides the fundamental answer to the question, why am I here? For many of us, I mean, and I was also trying to figure out the difference when you talk about. Someone used the phrase high art in describing the work of a practitioner that also is a designer, and saying when he does high art, I was thinking, high art, what a funny idea. Is that like haute cuisine compared to everyday cooking? So when do you enter the realm of high art? Well, I don't think there was such a thing. I mean,
or fine art.
I think there's a thing called art and there's a thing called not art. And trying to make any other categorical distinction is useless and doesn't help anyone except in terms of status or manipulation. I mean, but we do know that in the presence of art, we are transformed, that we feel differently. And that, I think that goes for the maker and for the user, that you know that if you're standing in front of a Pier della Francesca, when you leave, you're no longer the same.
Could that be applied to I Heart New York or Dylan or any of the other icons that you've created, that it may have a different effect or a different purpose, but the effect is I've seen something that makes me think, makes me do, makes me happy?
Well, I think that's a very good question, and one that I've puzzled over all my life, and without ever hoping to find an answer. I mean, the why is very hard to find. iHeart, there are probably a million equivalents to the iHeart New York. And it probably could have been done a million other ways. But there was something of that particular form or configuration of the relationship of the voluptuousness of the red part to the stringency of the black part, whatever it was, it triggered something neurologically in the brain and became an object of affection and durability. I mean, I did that in 1977.
Durable it is. Copied it is.
Durable count.
But in that sense, in that durability, people wouldn't respond to it if they didn't have that overriding joy that you get from a Piero della Francesca.
Yeah, that's the point is, at one point I said, you know, it seems to me the most important thing about the creation of art is in its role of creating affection. That art serves to create affection. Not only for the object that you're experiencing, but for the world at large. It's a very funny way to define it. I mean, it's certainly not a very precise way to define it.
No, but it's a lovely way to set a standard.
You know what I'm talking about,
yeah,
right? You know, you have a beautiful book, and you take it home, the binding is gorgeous, and there's a wonderful lithograph or something. And that creates in you this, at least momentarily, this feeling of affection and, I guess you know, use the word closure or some work like that, of psychological terms. But everything doesn't achieve that. I mean, you could do 20 things and one maybe gets close and the rest just don't do it. And I think there has to be some recognition that that most works fail in that regard. They may succeed intellectually, decoratively, functionally, and still not produce this other thing that we look for when we call something a work of art.
Yeah, you once said that the ratio of good to bad work or good to mediocre work is always the same. That just because more people are doing graphic design or interior design or whatever design form they've entered into, it doesn't mean that the quality has risen
Yeah.
exponentially.
Well, it's funny, isn't it? I mean, it's not easy. I mean, to produce this, you can become very skilled and very effective. And you can also do something that designers do primarily. Designers don't make art. That isn't their job as such. Their job is to find a need and fulfill it, or to move with purpose to accomplish a specific goal that is objectified and so on. And you could do that without even touching on the world of art. I mean, there's no reason to bring art into the picture. But for me, that wasn't enough. I mean, simply solving a a design for a book jacket so that it would sell in the context of the bookstore was an intellectual task, marketing related, who's using what colors, all the usual garbage. But what I thought was if I could add that dimension so it also satisfied something else that wasn't called for, I would be doing something that really gave me pleasure.
But could you do that intentionally? I mean, you talk a lot about an intention, or is that just something that's within you that comes out? And as you said before, out of 20 pieces, one might hit that mark.
Well, I think you have to want it. I mean, I think and most or a lot of people in the design world are attracted through the realm of art. I mean, the first thing they know is that they like to draw as a kid. And they make little pictures, and then by the time they're 12, they're making comic strips. And then, I mean, I loved comic strips. I loved narration through the comics. And then you begin to draw, and then you discover that there's a way that you can draw that doesn't look like the comics. And then you go on to find there's this other world of color and shape and form and typographies. And before you know it, you're a designer and so on.
Well, there was a period of time where you were doing representational but stylized things. And then that style kind of multiplied. You were doing what we'll call psychedelic. And then you went back into more realism. I know that your Monet portraits, there's an impressionism quality, but they're also representational. And more recently, you've been working with pattern. What is the evolutionary road that gets you?
I think for myself, the evolutionary road is curiosity. It's just see how far you can go. And I've never seen the distinction between, say, abstraction and reality. There is no reality. Everything is an abstraction. So the idea of this sort of 19th century idea of what is real is nonsense. I mean, it's all up here in the brain. You make it yourself. There's nothing out there. And so that idea that abstraction was really another manifestation, a stylistic manifestation, if you will, of an attempt to represent an idea you had of what the world is, but it was a lie. I mean, reality is a lie. It's a great, did you read the book, Reality Hunger?
No.
A wonderful book. And it said something, I can't remember who said it, I'm trying to get the quote, that after Duchamp, everything that was naturalistic was plagiarism.
Yeah.
And I love that. That's not exactly the quote, but it's something like that. The idea that once you had explored representation and how to make a form turn in space and light come down on a head and mastered it and could do it, and the Renaissance did it, and then 19th century French did it. So you didn't have to do it anymore.
Right.
Then you could pull away and start making the space between things more important than the things themselves. Incidentally, that's my current obsession, is this observation that the space between everything now has become more meaningful than the things themselves.
And how is that manifesting itself in the work that you're doing?
Our work has gotten spacier and more
Not spaced out.
not spaced out, and more about the intervals between objects and the objects themselves. I mean, I'm not there because I'm just beginning thinking about a lot of other people have been thinking about it in other areas. Music, for instance. I mean, if you listen, you can't understand contemporary music unless you listen for the spaces. And you suddenly realize everything shifted. What we used to look at now is over here, and it's wonderful to think that you don't have to stop thinking.
Can that be applied to graphic design? Let me just give you an instance that comes to my mind. Victor Moscoso, great psychedelic poster artist, he used to tell me that the way he created letter forms was by doing the spaces between the letters. And then the letters took form.
Yeah. Well, I think Victor worked on it. I think he was a brilliant practitioner. It's a little different. But if you look around at the young work that I see, which by and large I find incomprehensible, until I realized that the underlying influence is spatial to the degree that things have been torn apart. The forms that we of the modernist school were interested in, the curve against the square, the geometry, the rational adjustment, all of that has disappeared because somebody said, or collectively we have said, we're finished with that. Enough of the forms. Let's see what's going on in between. And suddenly you see everything looks fragmented and disassociated and in pieces, and you can't. Where's the center? Where's the center?
Yeah, it's kind of like what now they call ADHD, attention deficit disorder.
Yeah, well, you might say the culture is suffering for that on many levels, but you can no longer find the center because there is no center, and the lack of centrality, I might say, is universal. Right? It's in politics, it's in the behavior of nations. Is in political speeches. I mean, suddenly you discover that, hey, there's no there. There's no center there. And I think this is, I haven't followed this path assiduously, but the idea that now you have to look, everything is on the edge. It's all at the edge, and that what's happening where there is nothing is more important than it's ever been.
But do you feel that you still have a centrality? Do you feel that it's what you're looking at is emanating from a core?
Well, I am like everyone. I'm a prisoner of my own history, but I'm very curious also because after you do something for a while, you run out of alternatives. And you can no longer see what you're doing. There's always development, but now I think my deepest interest and the thing that gives me the most delight, is the sense that everything is connected, that there are no unrelated events, that everything, if you look for it, is connected to everything else, no matter how strange and random those connections are. My wife and I went shopping one day at an antique show where we bought some Nigerian hats, little brims, very finely knotted and fantastic colored. They're built up this way. And they were on the wall in a pattern, so you could just see them from the top. And we took them home, we put them in our hall. And we have a standing Buddha in the hall. And we put 3 of the hats on the sculpture of the Buddha. And we discovered that the hats were exactly the same form and shape as the top of the Buddha's head. So the Nigerian hat fits on top of the Buddha's head, as though it were designed for that. But I now find that everywhere, that everything has this implicit or explicit connection, and you can find those connections, and they're so fantastic.
Is that because you're looking for them? Or is it because, I mean, if they're there, but you're more attuned to that
Well,
way of thinking?
yeah, I don't know if you're looking for them or they're looking for you. I mean, it's a question of your willingness to see what's in front of you.
So in your own work, be it for a client or be it for yourself, is this coming up? Are you seeing it in what you're doing?
Yeah, I do. And I'm also trying to push it along. I mean, I'm trying to subvert the assignments to accommodate my interest. I suppose everybody does that, but I now have something that you're never supposed to do. I have a stock of patterns and forms and drawings that I very often start a job with. So if somebody says I'm doing a new cover for a Bach sonata, first I'll go to the Bach portrait thing, and then I'll pull it out, and then I'll pull out some typography I designed maybe 30 years ago, and I'll put it together. But so assembling from the random pieces of what I've done, what I do in other areas too, which is again collage from the available material, a new relationship of the parts, or an acknowledgement of the fact that those parts have something in common.
Is this something, this collaging sensibility, was it something that you did, say, 20 years ago, or is this totally new to your
I think
being
implicitly it was something I did for a long time, but explicitly over the last few years, part of it philosophical and trying to understand the way the brain worked and the connectedness of everything. It's become more explicit, and I have become more conscious of doing it.
So we've talked about this creative side. What about the political side of your life? Has that become more intense over the last 10 years, let's say?
Well, it's always been a component, but I don't even separate it in my mind as a different activity. It comes under that same heading of do no harm. If you could do something that basically politically you think is healthy for people or beneficial to people, the next issue is how to make that manifest and how to make it strong. So now we have a bunch of projects on, drug use and checking on backgrounds of people who use guns and climate control. That stuff is something we always keep going in the studio as self-initiated activities because we think it's part of what it means to be a good practitioner.
And many of these self-initiated projects you've actually put out into the world.
Yeah.
And there's one you're working on now with SCA as a sponsor. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I don't know if we want to reveal that before we reveal it. I don't know when we're scheduled to post that.
Well, then let me rephrase. There are projects that you've done that have gone out into the world that are almost journalistic in a sense. Do you see putting things out right away as a direct response to some injustice or crisis or problem as important to you personally as well as to the people who you're trying to influence?
Well, it's certainly important to me personally, but I'm very suspicious of doing good if it serves only to elevate the maker, you know. Here's something weird. There's an enormous amount of activity, and it relates to what you were asking, enormous amount of activity over the question of climate control and the environment. And none of these people will work together. So while there are thousands of individual groups, there's no collective sense that we're all doing this for the same purpose, that the heroic model of I am going to make a contribution by being a good person becomes the most important part of any project. You try to get any three groups together to work collectively to accomplish ostensibly what is the same, you can't get it done. So the first thing you have to understand is that one thing that's happened in our time, which is the collective resistance to persuasion, or to, in fact, any manifestation of opinion. I mean, one of the weird things in the world's culture now, as soon as an idea comes up, it's resisted. Anything that's stated, its antithesis occurs within moments, right? And in the case of climate control, let's say all the scientists, 97% of the scientists in the world are saying that we don't have another 200 years to live. And the oil companies will say, we have a scientist in New Jersey who says that the vested interest and the manipulation that occurs and the persuasion that occurs has made most people cynical about the messaging they get every day.
Are you cynical?
Oh, profoundly, profoundly, not only cynical, but I mean, aware that of the conspiratorial nature of most of what goes on in communication.
Heard after you published your 10 principles of being a good citizen, being a good designer, and to do no harm became a pejorative for some people. Said, what do you mean do no harm? What kind of authoritarian preach is that? You know, have you experienced when you don't go around that much now to conferences, but you give talks and there'd be people that would stand up and applaud when you gave your principles, but there are others that are basically saying, why is he telling me what to do?
Well, of course, everybody does it. I do it. You know, who are you to tell me what to do or what to think or anything else? So any authoritarian figure now is in trouble that way. And also, these are complex issues when you say do no harm. I mean, given the inevitable unintended consequences of any act, right? No matter how good your intentions seem to be, you may be causing terrible mischief. It is not simplistic. I mean, doing no harm is not a simplistic issue because one thing leads to another, right? But one has to approach it with some degree of humility. You can't feel, above all, you can't feel you know everything and you have all the answers. I mean, you have to recognize how stupid you are. And I used a quote in a little gift box for watches, how long it takes to become aware of the fact that we know nothing. And I think that's not a bad thing to hold in the mind.
That's kind of like Avis, we're number 2.
Not exactly.
Not exactly. Many of your projects these days are going beyond the client art designer paradigm. You're creating products for ultimately sale, clocks, watches, wrapping paper, and the like. Where does this come from in your history?
I don't know. It's a treacherous business. I don't know, because
Well, that's important to know.
it is. I mean, he who enters the bath sweats. A favorite quote, my old friend Javante Vivian. I love household objects. I love dishes. I love glasses. I love all those objects of daily life that when somebody gave Shirley 4 Chinese teacups. And there's something about the rim of the cup when you bring the tea to your lip that is so deeply satisfying. Now, this design problem, right?
Yeah.
Design problem. And it's easy enough to make that unnoticeable experience or an irrelevant experience, but somebody paid attention, they made it. So in those areas, I feel perfectly comfortable. I had a show of rugs made in Tibet, and they gave me one that I have in my living room, and it gives me great pleasure to see it. And I love things made for the home. I mean, there is that craftsman function of making things for use that in their decorative role are benign. I mean, they either create harmony or a pleasant environment, or they don't. But you can work towards that, and they're not as complex as questions of persuasion or communication.
But where does the sweat come in?
Well, when they tell you after you make a presentation that no, our customers really like gray more, and this year we're using red and blue, and so on. The authority of the marketing group, who always have to work on what they know from the past and can never look forward. I mean, and if you're in this area looking forward and trying to press on is one of the great satisfactions. But marketing, and this is an existential issue, marketing always looks backwards. It always looks at what has already happened, that is already known, that you can already quantify. And for us, the people who, I guess the best people in art and design and so on, want to use that information to take it and move it and continue the energy and the beneficial qualities of changing form. So you really have to face the essential resistance of most of the commercial world to what you want to do.
If those items that you have produced were only for your home,
Yeah.
would you be satisfied?
No, I like the idea of my work being seen and experienced by others. It's very important for me. And I mean, I didn't want to be a painter and have a picture of mine hanging in somebody's living room. No, that's not me. I don't want to make pictures for that purpose. What I want is my work to have an effect in a general sense of the culture I'm living in.
Mm-hmm. So since there are many students in the audience at Offset, and it's an inevitable question, what would you say to them about being a designer in the 21st century right now, where technology has almost become more important than content, or sometimes it's become the content, where branding has overtaken the conversation amongst designers as primary? What is it that the designers out there who are just starting or are still in school, what should they know?
This is a cosmic question, Mr. Heller.
I believe in the cosmos. It's the only sure thing.
But one of the things is I think you have to recognize that there is tremendous dissension in the world and a collapse of a singular belief. and probably the end of capitalism as we know it. The idea of the individual genius triumphing over resistant forces, and the idea of that you can accomplish your advantage by virtue of exploiting others has probably begun to diminish. We see it all around the world, people saying, I've had enough, I ain't gonna take it anymore. And that has become a kind of thematic idea of our time all over. Certainly in this idea in the United States that the discrepancy between the 1% and the 99% is so outrageously unfair that people are beginning to now publicly resist this idea. And so we're reaching a point where the sense of common purpose has diminished enormously, and the sense of privilege has reached its full manifestation. And I think the role of people in design and in art and a culture in general is to reestablish the commonality of people's lives, their relationship to others. And yet that really is what art and design do at their highest level. They establish the meaning, the relationship, and the common form of a culture's aspiration. And that's what I think people should think about in their lives now. It's a very big job. Maybe it's the biggest job that's ever occurred, because it doesn't mean you simply perform the needs of a commercial culture, but you perform to enable that culture to survive happily and to establish a value system that says this is what a good civilization is.
Is that what you do as a teacher?
Try to. And it's funny, I'm moving in teaching, as you know, I'm moving more to teaching collectively, teaching people to work together on things rather than using the 19th century heroic model of individual genius. Because there are very few geniuses in the world, and we only need a few. What we really need are most people working together to create a better situation for all of them.
Don't want to make pancakes from scratch? We can take care of that. Lego the Dago.
Guys, this is Peggy.